Welcome back to the program. Let's bring in Richie Merzian. He's the Climate and Energy Program Director at the Australia Institute. Richie, thanks very much for your time. I've reported this afternoon this statement from the State Department saying the US and UK working together on fighting climate and in fighting climate change. You've got John Kerry there, Boris Johnson, Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. It's all heading in one direction this year. Would you expect that to translate into great diplomatic pressure from both the UK and the US on Australia?
Yeah, it's quite a big deal that the US is putting so much attention towards rallying countries to do more, and that they've sent their top diplomat to London to actually come up with a plan for how to do so. In that statement, they've actually said that they will use the Climate Leaders Summit that President Biden is organising on the 22nd of April, as well as the G7 that Boris Johnson's hosting, both of which Australia will attend, to actually pressure all countries, but specifically these big emitters, these big economies. That means that for Prime Minister Morrison, he will have to look at how he ups his game. Otherwise, he's looking at being marginalised by some key allies.
He seems like he's certainly shifting in that direction of setting a 2050 target. It would make sense given where the international pressure lies. Would you agree that there are signs, both from him and Energy Minister Taylor, that that's clearly where they're headed?
Yeah, there are some good signs. The preference for moving to net zero by 2050 is a good sign. The preference not to use these dodgy Kyoto credits, which most agree is a form of cheating, that's a good sign. But it's small beer compared to what will ultimately be required. It's worth recalling that the US will announce their 2030 target at this April 22nd summit. It's likely to be in the realm of somewhere from 40 to 50% emissions reductions in the next 10 years. Their starting point is a very similar point to what Australia has now as its current emission reduction target for 2030. So really, it could be a situation where the US announces something that's almost twice as strong as what Australia currently has, and then turns around and asks Australia to follow suit. And that's really what the Prime Minister will have to contend with. It's not what's going on in the long term to 2050, but it's what he'll be doing over the next 10 years to increase that ambition, whether we can increase that 2030 target, and what that looks like in terms of concrete policies in transport, in industry, in electricity to actually get there.
Under the Paris Agreement, wasn't it until 2025, though, that nations were going to set their interim 2035 target? Isn't that correct, that it was still a couple of years away in that sense?
Yeah, every 5 years you go ahead and you set a target for the next 10 years. That's correct. But ultimately, what the latest science is saying is that it's not good enough what's currently on the table. In fact, if you add up everyone's 2030 target, it's less than 1% of what we need to avoid dangerous climate change. So really, the pressure is on for all countries to revisit their immediate target. And that's where I think a lot of the energy will be focused from the United States as it announces its increased ambition, from the UK, which has gone from 40% coal-fired power in their grid to 5% over the last 10 years. So they're taking some major strides as well. John Kerry, who was just in London, is now going to Brussels to talk to the EU. He's then going to Paris to talk to the French. He's going around the world rallying countries, and soon enough he'll be knocking on Australia's door asking to do more in the next 10 years. And Prime Minister Morrison will have to have more to show for it beyond just a preference for doing a little bit better.
Will he also, Kerry, and Biden for that matter, they've taken a strong stance when it comes to China in a strategic viewpoint, but on climate as well, will they be saying to China, as one of the two biggest emitters, you've got to step up as well?
Yep. There's no doubt that this message is also for China, as the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. And China just released its next 5-year plan, which is a bit vague on how we'll actually meet that goal of carbon neutrality by 2060. But we're still expecting a detailed plan further in the year. Often China under-promises and then over-delivers. And it could be that they just want to open up a channel with the US to see what could be agreed. It's worth recalling that John Kerry, the top envoy for the US, has been reappointed. He helped negotiate the Paris Agreement. His Chinese counterpart has been brought back from retirement to lead Chinese negotiations on their climate deal. So there's some really good signs from China that they're at least willing to come to the table to see what they can negotiate this year. And so all eyes will be on what that deal looks like when the US does start focusing more attention on the largest emitter.
Do you think there'll be growing pressure on Labor as well to set an interim target, whether it be 2030 or 2035? And what sort of ballpark should they be looking at?
Well, Labor did have a target that was more ambitious than what the current government have. And I doubt that they will go back to what the current government is offering. Labor has set a net zero by 2050 target. That will require more ambition over the next 10 years, certainly more ambition than what the current government, the Morrison government, is offering. So we'll see what Labor comes up with. But the real question will be what policies are going to be put on the table to immediately start turning things around. Because right now, if you look at some areas of the economy like transport, the federal government has no policies to curb those rising emissions, nothing about electrifying our fleets, nothing around emission standards. So there'll be a lot of attention put towards what policies are being brought forward, both from the current government and hopefully from Labor as we approach the election.
Richie Merzian, Climate and Energy Program Director at the Australia Institute. Thank you, as always. Appreciate your time and insights.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.